No one wants a Chinese girl, sir, but I can nurse your newborn, Rancher replied. Then stay here. Sometimes fate rides in quiet, under the hiss of falling snow. A woman searching for mercy. A man who buried it long ago. Two souls, one burdened by grief, the other by exile, meet on the edge of a world that has forgotten kindness. In the gray hush of winter, where breath turns to ghosts and the past never sleeps, their eyes meet once, and everything that follows begins with that single look. The morning train sighed to a stop like an old creature too tired to fight the cold. Steam billowed up from its sides, gray and restless, curling over the platform until the station disappeared behind a veil of frost. The wind carried the smell of coal and iron and the faintest hint of sorrow. Maylie stepped down into it, her boots sinking in snow that had no memory of warmth. The moment she set foot on the platform, she knew this town was not waiting for her. Her hands tightened on the handle of her small satchel, a frayed leather thing holding what little she owned. Inside lay an old cooking pot, its lid dented, its handle polished by years of use. It was more than a tool. It was proof she had once been needed. The station master looked up from his desk as she approached. His eyes flicked from her face to her clothes and back again. Before she could speak, he shook his head. "No work here, miss." He said it the way a man spits out a seed, fast, final, without cruelty, but with no room for hope either. Two women on the bench looked up from their knitting, pale eyes pinched under wide-brimmed hats. Their stares pressed like a weight against May's skin. She bowed slightly out of habit, but they did not nod back. The cold bit through her shawl. She stepped aside, letting the wind carry away the sting in her chest. The world seemed smaller with every refusal. Still, she stood a little longer, because leaving too soon might look like defeat, and she'd learned that dignity was sometimes all a woman had left. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats, faint at first, then steady. She turned. Out of the gray horizon rode a man shaped by distance and loss. He was tall, his shoulders heavy under a wool coat dusted with snow. His hat brim hid his eyes, but his presence filled the empty street as if the land itself shifted to make room for him. Across his arm lay a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. It moved once, weakly, with the fragile insistence of life. The horse stopped near the platform, breath clouding in the bitter air. The man dismounted slow, boots crunching deep into snow. He carried himself like someone who hadn't slept in a long time, and had made peace with that. "Trained master," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Any nurse pass through?" The station master pointed without looking. "Only her." The man turned, and that was how Maylie and Alex Anderson first saw each other. For a breath, neither spoke. Snow hissed between them, settling on the brim of his hat and melting on her lashes. Then the child stirred in his arms, a small cry that broke the silence like the first note of a hymn. May's voice came quiet, carried by wind. "Is he cold?" Alex's jaw flexed, his eyes dark and hollow. "He's hungry," he said. "And his ma—" He stopped there, as though the word itself was a wound. The silence after it said everything. May took a cautious step forward, hands open, palms bare. "I can help. I cook, clean, nurse if need." He studied her with that wary look men wear when pride stands between them and salvation. His breath came hard. The baby whimpered again, thin as a bird's cry. "No one wants a Chinese girl," she whispered, half to herself. "But I can nurse your newborn, sir." Something in him flinched. Maybe it was the way she said sir. Not soft, not pleading, but with quiet certainty, like someone who'd already accepted the world's cruelty and chose to live anyway. He looked down at the child. Tiny hands trembled, mouth searching for warmth that wasn't there. He exhaled through his nose, a sound that might have been surrender. Then he nodded once. Then stay. 2 words. Heavy as a vow. He offered his gloved hand. She hesitated, unsure if it was trust or test. When she took it, his palm was rough and warm against her frozen skin. He helped her onto the wagon beside him. Neither spoke as the horse started toward the white hills. Behind them, the lone lantern at the station flickered once, then went dark. The road west wound through fields buried under snow. Fences leaned, pines bowed, and the sky pressed low, gray as worn tin. A single crow followed them for miles, black against the white. May sat rigid, clutching her satchel. The baby's soft breaths filled the small silence between them. When the wagon hit a rut, she steadied him gently, her voice a whisper. "Little bird, don't cry." The sound was foreign, lilting, like a melody from another country. Yet it soothed even Alex, who found himself listening despite the ache it stirred. He passed her a canteen. "Long road," he said. "How long?" "Few hours. Cabin near the ridge." She nodded, eyes on the horizon where clouds glowed faintly, silver bruised with dusk. She could feel the grief coming off him in quiet waves. Men who spoke little often carried too much. They stopped once by a frozen creek. Alex poured a bit of water into a tin cup, warming it with his breath before handing it over. "For him," he said. May took it, tilting the cup to the baby's lips. A drop glimmered on his chin before vanishing. She smiled faintly. "He'll live," she said. "He wants to." Alex's throat worked, but only a single rough word came. "Good." It sounded like gratitude wrapped in restraint. As they rode again, the light thinned. Lantern glow swayed from the wagon side, carving gold halos in the swirling flurries. "Does it get lonely?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. "Used to it," he said finally. "Maybe the baby won't be," she murmured. He turned his head slightly, watching her profile lit by trembling lantern light. The faint scar above her brow, the calm she wore like armor. Snowflakes landed on her lashes and melted there. Something inside him shifted, quiet and unfamiliar. When the cabin appeared, just a shadow on the hill, smoke rising slow, May's breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's cold," he replied. But this time warmth edged his tone. They halted before the porch. The child slept. May climbed down first, boots sinking deep into snow, and reached to take the bundle from his arms. He hesitated, then let her. She held the infant close, stepping toward the light spilling from the window. Inside waited a table covered in dust, a cradle untouched, and a chair overturned. She looked back at him through the doorway, her figure framed in amber light and falling snow. "He'll need milk soon," she said. Alex met her gaze. The wind caught the edge of his coat. "Then you better make yourself at home." For a long moment, neither moved. The baby stirred between them, a small sound, fragile but alive. Outside, the storm thickened, sealing the world in white as if to close them inside their fate. The first night settled heavy over the ridge. Inside the cabin, firelight wavered against stone and wood. May moved through the room like someone trespassing in another woman's memory. The air still held the scent of candle wax and sickness. She found the cradle near the hearth, carved from pine, edges worn smooth by care. The baby whimpered softly, tiny fists curling. She bent low, whispering words she hadn't spoken in years. A lullaby from another life. The child quieted, and even the storm seemed to listen. Alex stood by the door, coat still on, hat shadowing his face. He watched her in silence, not coldly, just as a man does when he's forgotten what to say. When she finally looked up, he spoke. "You can use the small room by the stove. It's warmer there." "Thank you, sir." "No need for sir. Alex is fine." She almost smiled. "Then thank you, Alex." He turned toward the stairs, his boots creaking against old wood. She listened until his steps vanished above, then let herself breathe again. Through the window, the barn stood dark against the snow. Smoke rose from the chimney. twisting fragile and blue into the night sky. May pulled her shawl close and set to work, not because he asked, but because stillness felt dangerous. She cleaned the table, washed the dishes, lit the lamps one by one. Her movements were quiet, rhythmic, as though trying to teach the house to breathe again. By the time the fire had burned low, the room looked lived in. The faint smell of broth filled the air. When Alex came down at dawn, he stopped at the threshold. The sight stilled him. The home he'd left to grief now looked alive again. She turned, startled. "I found dried beans," she said quickly, "and salt pork." He nodded once. "Smells better than anything I've had in weeks." He sat without invitation. She served without asking. They ate in silence, the fire crackling softly. The baby slept in the cradle, his breath steady and small. Outside, the snow eased. Inside, two souls shared warmth neither had expected to find. The wind outside shifted, gentle now, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. May looked to the window. Beyond it, dawn spread like ash turned to light. Somewhere in that quiet, something wordless had begun, something fragile but alive. And though neither of them yet knew it, the long road west had just become a road home. A cabin still remembers the hands that built it. Her laughter, her scent, her silence, all left behind in the dust. Now another woman walks those same floors, quiet as prayer, carrying warmth where the fire once died. But the dead aren't the only ghosts in these hills. A town can haunt a soul, too, and mercy can draw a sharper line than sin. Snow pressed against the windows like a living thing. The fire snapped, filling the room with restless light. Maylie moved to the small cabin the way one enters a church, careful, reverent, afraid to disturb what had once been holy. Every surface carried the memory of someone else's life. A shawl folded on a chair back. A comb still resting on the mantel. The air smelled of lavender faded into smoke. She could almost feel the eyes of the woman who had lived here, the one who'd left her husband and child to the mercy of the cold. Alex Anderson sat at the table, hat off, hands clasped as if in prayer. The firelight cut across the tired lines of his face. Outside, wind clawed at the eaves, but inside the only sound was the baby's breathing and the slow beat of two hearts that hadn't yet decided to trust each other. May ladled broth into a tin bowl and set it in front of him. "You need strength," she said softly. He looked at it for a long moment before lifting the spoon. Steam curled between them, carrying the scent of beans and bone. He ate like a man and used the being served. "You've done much," he murmured finally. "Place looks different. I only cleaned what was waiting to be clean. That's more than most would have done." The compliment came awkward, like a language he hadn't spoken in years. She said nothing, only turned back to the stove. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It hummed with something uncertain, alive. At dawn, he left to chop wood. Through the frosted window, she watched him, each swing deliberate, the rhythm steady, the breath white in the air. His grief clung to him like frost on a coat. But beneath it, there was steadiness, a kind of honor she recognized. When he returned, she handed him coffee, black and scalding. "You work too long," she said. "Work keeps the house from remembering." She lowered her eyes. "Maybe remembering keeps the soul from freezing." He almost smiled. Almost. The days formed a pattern. His labor, her quiet tending, the baby's thin cries stitching them together. At night, she sewed by the fire while he mended tools. Words were few, but gestures spoke. When she burned her hand on the kettle, he fetched a jar of salve and set it beside her without comment. The next morning she found her worn gloves replaced with a fur-lined pair. No note, no mention. A slow peace settled over the cabin, fragile as glass. One evening, while the baby slept, May lifted the small wooden box she had found near the hearth. Inside lay a woman's comb, a folded letter, and a ring dulled by time. She traced the edge of the comb, then set the box back exactly as it was. Some grief was best left where it rested. Behind her, the floorboards creaked. Alex stood in the doorway, lantern in hand. "I thought I heard something," he said. "Only memory," she answered. He studied her face in the amber light. "You're not afraid of ghosts?" "I have carried mine too far to fear another's." Something in her tone stilled him. He nodded once, then crossed the cradle. The baby stirred, lips parting in sleep. Alex brushed a thumb over the small hand. "He looks more like his mother every day." May hesitated. She was kind enough to stay until the end. The words fell heavy, final. The fire popped. Smoke curled up the chimney like a sigh from the dead. When the storm broke a week later, Alex hitched the wagon for town. "I'll need supplies," he said. "I'll come," May offered. He shook his head. "Town's not ready for you." She felt the sting, but said nothing. The wind caught her shawl as he rode away, leaving her standing in the drift, the baby warm against her shoulder. He returned at dusk, snow in his beard, temper in his eyes. "They talk," he said shortly. "She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. They always will." He looked at her then, truly looked. The quiet dignity, the scar above her brow, the steadiness that refused pity. "Don't listen," he said. "It is easier not to listen," she replied, "when one has nowhere else to go." He turned away before his silence betrayed feeling. The next morning brought a rare light, thin gold spreading over the ridge. Alex went to mend the fence by lantern glow, while she scrubbed the floor until her arms trembled. Near sundown she found him still working. The wind had turned sharp, cutting through wool and skin alike. "You work too long," she said, her breath white. "Keeps me from remembering." She said nothing, only took the hammer from his hand. Together they finished the last board. When it was done, he looked at her, snow in her hair, cheeks raw from wind. "You remind me of her," he said. She froze. "Your wife?" He hesitated. "No, of the person I used to be." The wind moaned through the pines. She lowered her eyes. "That man isn't gone, Alex." "Maybe not, but he's buried deep." They walked back to the cabin side by side, the lantern between them swinging like a shared heartbeat. Inside, the baby was awake, eyes bright in the flicker of firelight. May lifted him, humming the same tune she had sung on the wagon. Alex paused by the door. "Where did you learn that?" "My mother sang it when winters were cruel," she said. "Said it kept the wind away." He nodded slowly. "Seems to be working." For the first time, she laughed, a soft, unsure sound that filled the room like spring thaw. It startled him. He found himself smiling before he realized it. They stood close to the fire, listening to the snow outside. Neither reached for the other, but the distance between them felt smaller than it ever had. The following morning brought visitors. A wagon creaked up the ridge, and the sound of judgment came with it. Mrs. Whitaker climbed down, her shawl stiff with frost. Two women from the church followed. Their eyes swept the cabin like searchlights. "You've taken her in?" "Mrs." Whitaker asked, chin tilted. Alex met her gaze. "She helps with the child." "Folks are talking," the woman said. "Best send her back to wherever she came from. You're a man of standing, Anderson. Think of your wife's memory." His voice stayed even. "She stays?" "Mrs." Whitaker sniffed. "You'll regret it. The town doesn't forget." When they left, May stood at the window, her reflection pale in the glass. "She is right," she whispered. "I bring trouble." Alex, still by the hearth, said quietly, "You bring warmth." The words hung there, dangerous and true. That night, she sat by the fire after he had gone to bed, watching the flame sink low. The baby slept soundly, his small chest rising with steady grace. She hummed again, but her voice broke halfway through. "Upstairs," Alex lay awake, listening. The sound of her song carried through the floorboards, fragile, trembling, and strong enough to hold the whole house together. He turned his face toward the dark and understood, with a sudden ache, that nothing inside him would ever be as quiet again. Outside, snow fell slow and endless, softening every edge of the world. Inside, a fire burned that neither dared to name. And somewhere between the hiss of the wind and the whisper of her song, the ghost began to fade. Between two heartbeats, silence could become a language. In the hush of shared mornings, a widower learns to breathe again, and a woman without a home begins to belong. But in towns like Rockville, kindness is a price, and love, spoken or not, can turn the gentlest dawn into a storm. Spring did not come so much as it crept. Snow thinned, leaving long ribs of mud and memory behind. The hills gleamed with meltwater, the air smelling faintly of pine and thawed earth. The world was waking, but careful not to startle itself. Alex Anderson rose before sunrise, as he always did. He lit the lamp, stoked the fire, and listened for the small sounds of life that now filled his cabin. May's light steps, the baby's soft coo, the kettle beginning to hum. Those sounds had replaced the silence that used to haunt him. They filled the cracks in him better than prayer ever had. May moved about the kitchen with unhurried grace. Her shawl brushed the edge of the table. Her hair, loose from its pins, caught the faint gold of the lamp. She rarely spoke in the mornings. She didn't need to. The rhythm of her work was its own language, water, fire, breath. When she poured his coffee, their fingers brushed. Neither drew back too fast. Outside, crows picked at the thawing ground. Inside, time slowed its boots. By midday, Alex worked the fence line. Sleeves rolled, sweat streaked with the grit of thaw. May brought him bread and broth, wrapped in a towel still warm from the stove. She stayed a few paces back, watching the light move over his shoulders. "You build strong," she said. "Strong don't always mean safe." "Nothing is safe," she replied softly. "Only worth it or not." He turned at that. Their eyes met in the wide quiet of the field. He wanted to say her name, not Missly, not girl, but May, the way a man says water after a long drought. Instead, he nodded once and went back to work. The baby's laughter reached them from the porch, high and new. May smiled. He sounded like sunlight. Alex paused his hammer mid-swing. "Didn't know sunlight made a sound." "It does," she said. "You just forgot how to hear it." Evenings came slow. They would eat by the fire, the baby asleep nearby, the world outside dimming to blue. Sometimes you would mend his torn coat, the thread moving steady through thick cloth while he read softly from a weathered book. He had not read aloud since before the funeral, but she listened as though each word mattered. When she laughed, rare, quiet, true, it struck him clean through. He began noticing the small things, the way she folded his shirts as if they were sacred, how she always left a bowl of rice near the window before a storm, how she touched the baby's cheek with 2 fingers and a prayer in her breath. He wanted to ask about her past, the ship, the journey, the life she left behind, but her silences were full of sorrow he had no right to touch. And so he listened instead, learning her through gesture. The first hint of danger came not from guns or storms, but from whispers. At the general store, he felt the weight of eyes. Men he'd ridden would turn their shoulders. The blacksmith's wife crossed the street when he passed. That night, May noticed a tension in his hands as he washed up. "Trouble?" she asked. "Nothing I can't weather." "You shouldn't have to weather alone." He looked up then, the lamplight cutting across his face. "You don't know this town." "I know people," she said simply. "Fear makes cruel hands." He had no answer, only the sound of the kettle between them, breathing steam like an old tire heart. Days passed. Spring pushed harder. Snow turned to rain that slicked the earth in silver. Alex taught her to ride the small mare that had belonged to his wife. May learned fast, too light for saddle, too stubborn to fall. When she finally managed to circle the yard without stumbling, she laughed, the sound echoing off the barn walls. "That's freedom," he said. "That's balance," she corrected. "Freedom comes later." He liked that answer more than he admitted. One afternoon he found her in the barn, mending harness leather by the open door. Light fell across her hands. She looked up as he entered, her smile shy but certain. "The world smells of rain," she said. He nodded. "Rain's the only mercy the plains ever promise." For a moment, that mercy filled the space between them. He reached to take the strap, their fingers grazing again, deliberate this time. Neither moved away. Then the baby cried from the house, and she stepped past him, shawl brushing his sleeve. The warmth of her passing stayed, like the afterglow of lightning. 2 nights later, thunder rolled over the valley. The baby woke screaming. May gathered him against her chest, whispering in her mother tongue until his cries turned to hiccups. Alex watched from the doorway, the storm light flashing across her face. "Does he fear the thunder?" he asked. "He fears being alone," she said. "Children always do. Grown men, too." He smiled faintly. "You think I fear it?" "I think you hear it," she said. "And that's worse." The storm passed, leaving silence so complete it felt like grace. They sat by the fire long after the baby slept, the air still charged, as if something holy had brushed by and gone. The next morning, Mrs. Whitaker returned. Not alone this time. Her husband and 2 ranchers rode up with her, their horses stamping mud onto the porch. Alex stepped outside, hat low, jaw set. "Morning," he said. "Not a good one," Whitaker grunted. "You've been warned, Anderson. You keep her here. You invite shame on every good Christian in this valley." Alex's hand rested on the porch post. "Shame don't build fences. Work does. Work won't save you when the town turns." May appeared in the doorway, the baby in her arms, her face calm, unreadable. "I mean no harm," she said softly. "Only help." Whitaker's wife muttered something about sin. The men turned their horses, muttering. As they rode off, Alex's voice carried after them. "She stays. That's the end of it." But it wasn't the end. The air after they left felt heavier, as though the hills themselves had taken sides. That night, May found Alex sitting outside on the steps, rifle across his knees, eyes on the horizon. The moon rose pale behind ragged clouds. "You expect them back?" she asked. "I expect storms, whatever form they take." She sat beside him, wrapping the shawl tighter. The wind stirred her hair across his sleeve. "You can't fight wind, Alex." "No," he said, "but I can face it." She watched his profile in the dim light. The scar along his jaw, the stubborn line of his mouth. "You fight because you lost before?" she said quietly. He turned to her then, something raw in his eyes. "And you heal because you can't stop losing." They stared at each other until words became useless. Then he looked away first. The wind sighed through the pines. Somewhere an owl called. The sound felt like a warning or a prayer. Days blurred again. The baby learned to crawl, laughter replacing crying. May's laughter followed. Alex began to hum when he worked, low and tuneless, but alive. The house had sound now. Clinking dishes, footsteps, small joys. Yet beyond their hill, the whispers grew sharper. Rumors have long legs and mean hearts. Someone carved a slur into his barn door. Another day, a dead crow left on the porch. Alex said nothing, just scrubbed it clean. May saw the way his hands shook when he thought she wasn't looking. That night, she found him staring into the fire, eyes distant. "They hate what they think they see," he said. "They hate what they've forgotten," she answered. "That mercy looks different on every face." He looked at her then as if seeing her for the first time. His voice dropped. "You're not afraid?" "Fear doesn't stop me," she said. "It just walks beside me." He reached out before he could stop himself. His fingers brushed the edge of her scarf, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in understanding. Then she whispered, "The fire's low." He let out a rough breath, half laugh, half ache. "I'll get more wood." When he stepped outside, the night felt sharper. Stars burned cold and clear. He stood for a long time, listening to the quiet inside, the sound of her humming again, the baby's faint sigh. The world had changed without asking him, and he found he didn't want to change it back. But the West never lets peace settle too long. Far down the ridge, a horse snorted in the dark, hooves shifting on frozen ground. A lantern glimmered briefly, then vanished behind the trees. By dawn, the rumors had circled in whispers would come riding with teeth. Inside, May slept near the cradle, the baby's small hand resting over hers. Alex watched him from the doorway, rifle still leaning by the wall, and knew the quiet between them had ended. Hate rides faster than mercy when whiskey lights the way. 3 men, 1 storm. A cabin that's more than wood. It's all that stands between life and the cold. In the blaze of night, love proves itself not in words, but in the fight to keep one fragile heart breathing. And when the fire dies, nothing in Rockville will ever look the same again. The storm came crawling over the ridge before dusk. Low clouds, gray and heavy, the kind that smother a man's voice before it leaves his throat. Alex watched it build while splitting logs. The air smelled of iron and warning. Inside, May hummed as she laid the baby to rest, her voice barely above the hiss of wind against the panes. The tune wove through the cabin like a thread, holding the world together. Each note steadied him. By nightfall, snow drove sideways. The wind screamed in the chimney. He barred the door and checked the rifle. Old habits born of war and wilderness. The baby stirred, and May turned from the cradle. "Bad wind," she whispered. He nodded. "It'll pass." But his gut said otherwise. The first knock came sudden and hard, a thud that shook the latch. Then another, louder, and laughter underneath. Alex froze. "Stay with the child," he said. His voice was flat, controlled, the kind of calm that knows what's coming. She pressed the baby close, eyes wide, pulse quick beneath her skin. Outside, a voice slurred through the storm. "Anderson, you home? Heard you keep a China whore warm in there." The words cut colder than the wind. Alex's jaw tightened. He moved to the wall, lifted the rifle from its pegs. "Go! May breathe, please. I'll handle it." He threw open the door before the next blow landed. Snow and firelight collided. 3 shapes stood in the yard, lanterns swinging wild in one man's hand. Harlan Pike, broad, drunk, and mean-eyed, grinned through broken teeth. Behind him, 2 ranch hands shifted their boots, drunk enough to follow evil wherever it led. "Well, there he is," Pike drawled. The widower what went and found himself a new bride from the rail camps. "Go home," Alex said, voice low as thunder. "Not till we see the lady." Pike stepped closer, snow crusting his beard. "You used to be one of us." "What happened, Anderson? Get lonely or just lose your damn mind?" The rifle came up, steady in Alex's hands. "You boys ride off." "Now!" Laughter cracked the air. The lantern swung. Shadows jumped. "Or what? You gonna shoot your old friends for her?" The barrel never wavered. "I'll shoot to keep peace." "Last chance." Pike spat. "Ain't no peace left." He lunged. The gun fired. Thunder and a coffin of snow. The shot tore splinters from the doorframe, missing flesh by inches. The lantern dropped, smashed in the drift, spilling flame across the white. Fire licked upward, wild and hungry. The men stumbled back, cursing. One grabbed a burning board and hurled it through the open doorway. It caught the curtain first, then the quilt. "Alex!" May's scream cut through smoke. He swung the rifle like a club, cracking across Pike's jaw. The man went down, blood dark against snow. Another swung from behind. Fist, boot, fury. Alex staggered, grappled, drove his shoulder forward. They rolled into the drift. Fire behind them roaring higher. Inside, smoke thickened. The baby cried once, a sound too small for so much fear. May tore the blanket from the wash line, soaked in the basin, and ran toward the cradle. Heat burned her face, would pop like gunfire. She threw the wet cloth over the child, lifted him, and ran through the haze. "Alex!" she shouted again, voice raw. Outside, the world was a blur of flame and snow. The men fled into the dark, their curses swallowed by wind. Alex knelt in the yard, blood on his lip, breath tearing through him. The cabin behind him blazed at the eaves. He looked up to see May, shawl half burned. The baby pressed her chest. She moved toward him, staggering. "Water!" he gasped. "Behind the barn." She ran. The wind tore her shawl away, stripped it into the night. Her fingers numbed around the bucket handle. She filled it with snow, ran back, flung it against the fire. Steam burst white. Again. Alex joined her, hauling water from the trough. The storm howled, the flames hissed, the baby's cry pierced everything. Together, they fought the blaze until their arms gave out and the night fell back into silence. Only the creak of cooling wood remained. They sank to the steps, faces streaked with soot, lungs burning. Snowflakes melted on their skin. The fire had eaten the porch rail and blackened half the roof, but the cabin still stood, scarred, alive. Alex looked at her, hair singed, hands blistered, eyes unbroken. "You saved him," he said hoarsely. She shook her head. "We saved each other." He almost smiled, but it came out a tremor. The baby whimpered. She cradled him closer, murmuring words too soft to catch. For a long time they said nothing. The snow kept falling, gentle now, as if the storm had spent its anger. When he finally stood, his legs trembled. He checked the barn, the horses. When he came back, she was still there on the step, the child asleep against her heart, the firelight painting her face in gold and ash. He knelt before her. "You could have run." "I had nowhere to run," she said simply, "and your child needed me." He looked at her burned hands, reached out, stopped. "Let me," she whispered, and placed them in his. His palms were rough, hers raw, but together they felt steady, like the land itself had decided they'd done enough breaking for one lifetime. "They'll answer for this," he muttered. She shook her head. "Let the snow bury their shame. The child needs warmth more than revenge." He wanted to argue. Couldn't. Her calm disarmed him in ways bullets never could. The wind softened to sigh. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. Life, stubborn and small, still sang. Before dawn, the storm eased. Smoke drifted in thin blue ribbons. The cabin stood blackened but upright. Inside, what could burn had burned. What mattered hadn't. May sat by the cradle, bandaged hands trembling as she rocked. Alex leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion making a stranger of him. "Sleep," she said. "You need rest." "So do you." "I'll rest when he does." He crossed the room, crouched beside her. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell. "He'll have stories one day," Alex said quietly. She smiled faintly. "He'll need none this dark." Their eyes met. What passed between them wasn't gratitude or pity. It was something forged by fire and held together by breath. He brushed a strand of her hair back, gentle. "Thank you, May." "You need not thank what your heart already knows," she murmured. He didn't understand it fully, but the truth of it rooted deep. Outside, the first color of dawn touched the snow. Pale gold spread across the ruined yard. Smoke rose straight into a sky scrubbed clean by wind. Alex lifted the baby, held him close. The child stirred, small fingers curling in his father's coat. He sounds different, Alex said. He knows he's safe now, she whispered. The world was quiet again. Not empty, just waiting. Waiting to see what they would make of this new light. Then, far down the valley, a single lantern swung on horseback, its flame glinting like judgment, a rider climbing fast through the drifts. Alex narrowed his eyes. Marshal Dodd, he muttered. May's fingers tightened on her shawl. He comes for what happened. Alex watched the figure draw near, hooves drumming over frozen earth. He comes for the truth, he said, and for the first time he wasn't sure what that truth would cost. The storm had burned itself out, but the fire it started, in their hearts, in the town and the land itself, was only beginning to spread. Dawn brings judgment with a tired face. The marshal rides for truth. The town rides for gossip, and a man and woman who have already survived fire must now survive rumor. But some reckonings don't come from a badge. They come from the heart that chooses mercy over memory. In the hush that follows ruin, forgiveness finds its first breath. The storm had burned itself out. What it left behind was silence, deep, patient, almost kind. Smoke drifted thin and gray from the blackened roof. Snow glittered where water had frozen in uneven ribs. Alex Anderson stood on the porch rail, hat in hand, the baby tucked against his shoulder. His eyes were red from smoke and sleeplessness, but softer now. Behind him, May swept the last of the ashes into a pail, every motion slow, deliberate, as though she were cleaning grief itself. From the valley came the sound of hooves on frozen earth, steady, unhurried. Justice seldom rushed. The rider broke through the morning haze, a square-shouldered man in a duster coat, lantern swinging from his saddle. Marshal Dodd, the law of Rockville and the weary conscience of its hills. He dismounted without a word, gaze sweeping over the ruins. His eyes, gray as the sky after rain, took in the scorched doorframe, the half-buried blood, the two souls still standing. Rough night, Anderson, he said. Heard gunfire all the way from town. Alex nodded once. 3 men came drunk. Brought fire with them. Where are they now? Gone. Dead, maybe? Snow'll tell. The marshal's jaw worked. You know I've got to ask questions. Ask. But it was May who stepped forward, hands bandaged, shawl pulled close. No need, she said quietly. They came to hurt us. I tried to stop them. I knocked the lamp. It caught the wall. Dodd looked at her, surprise flickering like light on steel. You take the blame? I take what's mine, she said, but not what's his. He studied her for a long moment. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the faint scent of burned pine. Town's changing, he murmured. Folks don't like it, but change don't ask permission. He tipped his hat toward Alex. I'll write it as self-defense. Let the snow bury the rest. Then he swung back into saddle. Keep the boy warm. When the hoofbeats faded, only the sound of melting snow remained, a soft, forgiving drip. Alex turned to May. You didn't have to speak. She looked down at her wrapped hands. If I hadn't, they'd call you murderer. He stepped closer. You could have left. I stayed because leaving would mean forgetting, she said. And I have forgotten too much already. He didn't answer. He couldn't. By midday, the valley stirred. Wagons climbed the ridge, drawn by the smoke that still marked the place. Mrs. Whitaker came first, wrapped in furs and suspicion. She stopped at the porch, gloved hands twisting. I came to see if you were alive, she said stiffly. Alive enough, Alex replied. Her eyes flicked to May, who stood behind him, sleeve charred, posture straight. Word had already reached town. The foreign woman who'd fought fire and fury, who'd saved the child when the men could not. Mrs. Whitaker's mouth pressed in. They say she saved the baby. Save your house, too. Alex met her gaze. That's truth. The older woman hesitated, then removed one glove, fingers trembling in the cold. Then I suppose I owe her thanks. May inclined her head slightly. You owe me nothing, ma'am. Only let your tongue rest. For a moment, even Whitaker seemed unsure whether it was defiance or grace. She turned away without another word, boots crunching in the snow. As the day lengthened, light fell gold over the ruins. May washed soot from the cradle, hung what linen she'd saved along the fence. Each movement brought life back into the space. Alex watched from the porch, the baby drowsing in his arms. Something about the sight stilled him. The quiet endurance of her hands, the way her breath rose like a prayer into the cold. "I'll rebuild," he said finally, stronger than before. She didn't look up. What is easy to rebuild? Hearts take longer. He stepped down, boots sinking in the slush. "You've done more than I can repay." "You don't repay grace," she said. "You return it." The simplicity hollowed him out and filled him all at once. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small ring, tarnished but whole, his wife's. She'd want this to mean something again, he said. He held it out. May froze. "You should keep it." "I have," he said quietly. "Too long." Her burned fingers hovered above the metal. "I am not your wife." "No," he answered. "You're the reason I can still be a man worth marrying." The words landed between them. Plain, impossible, true. She looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, the smoke on his skin, the kindness that had survived hellfire. Slowly, she let the ring drop into her palm. "I'll wear it," she said, "until it fits." He laughed once, rough, half-choked. The sound startled the baby, who whimpered, then sighed back into sleep. That evening, the two of them stood by the fence. The valley lay quiet beneath the first stars. Smoke from the hearth curled upward, pale and forgiving. "Do you think they'll forget what happened?" she asked. Alex shook his head. "They'll remember, but maybe they'll remember it honest." The wind carried the scent of pine and ash. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he didn't move away. "Sometimes," she said softly, "a fire has to burn what was never meant to stay." He looked down at her, the curve of her face lit by the last light of day. "And sometimes," he said, "what's left is the beginning." They stayed like that until the cold crept through their coats. When the baby stirred, she smiled faintly. "He needs milk." "Then let's go home," he said. Inside, the rebuilt fire glowed steady. Shadows climbed the walls like soft ghosts learning how to rest. May laid the child in the cradle, tucked the quilt around him, and turned. Alex knelt beside her, the ring glinting faintly on her finger. He touched her hand, not claim, but promise. "You belong here, May." She met his gaze. "We both do." Outside, dawn began again, pale gold spilling across the ridge. Smoke rose thin and pure into the sky. The air shimmered with quiet, the kind that follows survival, the kind that turns sorrow into memory. And as the wind moved through the pines, it seemed to whisper their story, of a widower who learned to love again, and a foreign woman who taught of valley mercy. Some stories don't end, they settle, into the land, into the blood, into the wind that keeps the hills from forgetting. Years pass, fences gray, children grow, but love, once earned in fire and frost, never leaves the valley. When the wind moves through the pines, folks still swear they can hear them, her song, his laugh, and the quiet promise that turned a house of ghosts into home. Spring found the valley slow and cautious, like an animal coming out of hurt. Snow shrank into gullies. The creek began to talk again, a low run of water over stone. Grass showed through the scars the fire had left. Alex rebuilt board by board. May planted herbs by the window. Her sleeves rolled, her hands still bandaged but steady. The child learned to walk on the new floorboards, his small steps echoing where grief once sat. By some of the cabins stood clean and square, smoke rising straight as prayer. Neighbors began to stop by, quietly at first, a jar of honey left on the fence. A sack of oats dropped near the barn. No words, but gestures. That's how her penance begins out here. Mrs. Whitaker came one afternoon with bread warm from her oven. She stood awkward in the doorway. "For the boy," she said. May wiped her hands on her apron. "He'll like that." The older woman hesitated, then added, "For you too, if you'll take it." May smiled, small and honest. "I will." When the wagon rolled away, Alex said softly, "Didn't think I'd see that day." "People change slow," May answered, "like seasons on rock." He grinned. "Then we'll wait them out." At night, the ridge turned silver. They would sit on the porch, the baby asleep between them, stars crowding the sky. Alex would point at constellations the way his father once had. May listened, chin on her knees. "Back home," she said once. "We named them differently. The bright one there, we called it the lantern, for souls lost at sea." He watched the light tremble on her face. "Guess it found us anyway." Sometimes she would sing again, that same fragile tune born on another shore. The valley would still itself to hear. Even the river seemed to slow. Autumn brought color like fire, but kinder. The boy, now sturdy on his feet, chased leaves across the yard. Alex built him a small wooden horse, rough but proud. May painted its mane with leftover ash, saying, "So he remembers where strength comes from." The town no longer whispered when they rode in for supplies. "Mister." Turner at the store tipped his hat, shame low in his eyes. "Fine weather," he said. "It is," Alex replied, and that was forgiveness enough. On the ride home, May looked back once. Smoke rose from the chimneys, steady and harmless. "They see us now," she said. "They always did," Alex said. "Just took a fire to clear their sight." Winter returned softer, as if remembering its manners. The night of the first snow, Alex lit the lamp by the window. May placed the baby, no longer quite a baby, in his cradle. "You think he'll remember this?" Alex asked. "No," she said, smiling. "That's why we must." He took her hand. The ring he'd given her glinted in the lamplight, fitting now as if it had always been meant for her. Outside, the wind sighed through pines. "Listen," she whispered. "It sounds like your land breathing." He nodded. "And if we're lucky, it'll keep breathing long after we're gone." They stood there for a long time, watching snow fall slow, each flake a quiet blessing. Years passed. The boy grew straight and kind. Travelers stopped by the Anderson place for food or shelter or stories. They always left with one. Some spoke of the fire that tried to take the house and failed. Others told of the woman who tamed the wind with a lullaby. Most just said they'd seen peace there, and that was miracle enough. On her last spring morning, May stepped out to porch early. Mist lay over the valley like breath on glass. She closed her eyes and listened. The creek, the far-off low of cattle, the soft roll of wind through pine, and beneath it all, the faintest echo of the song she had carried across oceans. When Alex came to stand beside her, he didn't speak. He only reached for her hand, still rough from work, still warm. The years had turned their faces to weathered maps of all they'd endured, but when they looked at each other, the world seemed newly made. Later that evening, he carved a small mark into the porch post, 2 initials intertwined. Not for show, just to let the house remember. As dusk settled, May lit the lamp once more. Its glow spilled into the yard, out to the road, into the fields where wheat would rise come summer. Somewhere downwind, a traveler saw that faint gold flicker and told himself, "That's where the good folks live." The years thinned. The land did what land does. Kept growing, kept forgetting, kept remembering. Old-timers in Rockville still talk about them when the air turns cold. about the widower who rebuilt his home from ash, and the woman who taught mercy to a valley that didn't know the word. They say the wind up by the ridge still hums her tune when the snow begins to fall. And if you stand there long enough, quiet enough, you can hear him answer, a low laugh carried through pine and time, reminding whoever listens that warmth doesn't come from fire at all, but from two hands that refuse to let the other freeze.